I do have an article out in Jacobin magazine today, which is called, well, yes, the title they ended up going with was Birthright, Citizenship, and Legal Equality Are Worth Defending. I think at one point, actually, what would have been the really ballsy title, would have fit the article is America is an Idea. I've kind of been joking with people all day since this article came out that I've actually let JD Vance negatively polarize me into being like outright patriotic and Jacobin. But it is about, like, the article is about, all jokes aside, it is about what I think is actually the best part of American society, right? The thing that if you are going to take pride in something about this country, you should take pride in, which is, I think, precisely the thing that Trump and Vance are trying to get rid of. So it's, the sort of basic, argument of the piece is that, Vance in particular, Trump's actions all go along with this. Trump hasn't been quite as ideologically crisp and coherent about explaining it as Vance is, because, the man's brains seem to be leaking out of his ears and mouth at a positively Biden-esque rate lately. I don't know if you guys saw the interview where Trump was convinced that Abrego Garcia actually had the letters and numbers MS-13
hilarious
tattooed on his knuckles, right? And you can there were other parts of the interview where you could tell Trump didn't believe what he was saying. He was just bullshitting. But this one, he seemed to he was taken aback that this was a point of dispute, right? The interviewer was like, "No, sir, that's not a real photo." And it was like, "Yes, it is." He
threatened to get it, which is my favorite part. It's like, get it, go, Trump, go.
Yeah, they really should have let him go get it, and so they could have looked at it together. So yeah, I think Trump is, unironically, I actually do think Trump. He's always been odd and crazy, but I actually do think he's undergoing real cognitive decline right now. But the vice president is still spry and uncomfortably clear about where he's coming from ideologically. So in the piece, I talk about, so going back to his speech at the RNC last summer, where he said, people say America is an idea, but that's not true. It's not an idea. It's a nation, defined by, the shared past and blah, blah, blah. And then I think it got even clearer. He had, Vance got into it on Twitter with a couple of sort of, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouths, but these are not people I found at a DSA meeting, right? These are media people who nobody would mistake for being big ideological leftists. Zed Jelani and Jesse Singal. And actually, that was one of the disconcerting things about this, that it's okay, those are both people who I mutually follow and interact with on Twitter. And, the vice president of the United States is yelling at them on social media. This is very strange. I don't like it. But in that interaction, there was a point where Vance was he was quote tweeting Singal, and he's says, talks about smug, self-assured bullshit, and says that he has a worldview that justifies the invasion. He's talking about immigration, but the invasion of the country that my ancestors built with their bare hands. And it just seemed to me that it was getting very, very blood and soily. That there is a very unsubtle implication hovering around all this, that the country is in some sense primarily the property of people who have the right ancestors, rather than just everybody who lives here. And so the basic argument of the article is, look, just about all real world nationalisms fall somewhere on a spectrum between pure ethno-nationalism and pure civic nationalism. Zionism is pretty much pure ethno-nationalism, that that they're the nation state law in Israel they adopted several years ago like says outright, formally, right, Israel's the nation state of the Jewish people. Never mind that most Jewish people don't live in Israel and don't want to, and a significant minority of Israeli citizens are non-Jewish. It just says that explicitly. So that's like a form of nationalism that's just completely identified with a certain ethnic subset of citizens. And then somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, you have like European nations that don't have that, but they also don't have like birthright citizenship, right? If you're like the child of like a Turkish guest worker, and I don't know, Germany probably. I'd have to look up some of the specifics, but I think that one's still true. You even if you're born there and grow up there, right? You're still not automatically a citizen. And then the U.S. actually, my favorite thing about the United States is that American identity is to a remarkable extent by global standards delinked from any sort of ethnic identity. Nobody says, "Oh, I'm a quarter American." It would sound like a category mistake. And this is this is the joke I always tell about how these days, like, nothing makes me feel more patriotic than thinking about Israel, which sounds like a really funny sentence for me to say, given my views. But I don't mean that I don't mean that I swell up with pride thinking about the United States sending 2,000-pound bombs for the IDF to drop on refugee camps. That makes me sick. I mean that I feel very intensely grateful that when it was time to get the fuck out of Ukraine, right, the Jewish side of my family came here instead of migrating to Palestine. So I got to grow up in a secular multi-ethnic democracy. And I think that a lot of the Trump stuff, and so like I think a lot of that's about sort of historical contingency, that if you think about the difference between the U.S. and a country like France, where you have over the course of the last couple hundred years, they've gone through like a variety of different forms of government, monarchy, democracy, fascism for a little while under Vichy, and there's this sort of French identity that's like survived all those transformations, right? But American identity sort of came into existence coextensively with the current form of government, and also, partially as a result of horrible things, right? The dispossession of natives, et cetera, right? But like the end result is that you have so many people from so many different backgrounds, right? That you don't have one that's just sort of overwhelming, that almost by default, we ended up having this sort of sense of national identity that's inclusive and civic, that's just sort of defined around, allegiance to democratic institutions, and the world historic victories of the civil rights movement in the 60s really reinforce that, right? I mean, sort of doubly true after that, because it's not even sort of linked to even a vague sense of European identity anymore, because of that, right? So it's like, look, through all the good and bad things that led to it, it's like, I think it was a tremendously valuable thing to, I mean, look, I ultimately, I think that my first choice would be that, we just did some sort of, fully automated luxury communist future, right? We just sort of have like a global federation a la Star Trek, right? I think that would be the best, but that is a very long way off from where we are right now. And it seems to me that given where we are right now, I think that sort of inclusive civic sense of American identity is this hugely valuable thing. And it's and those of us who want to sort of liberal capitalist democracy to be replaced by something better and more egalitarian rather than worse and less, right? I mean, it's a really tremendously valuable starting point to build from. And so I think that I think it's a huge mistake to sort of be kind of equally contemptuous of all forms of American identity or whatever, right? That's like a kind of rhetorical posture that some lefties I think are very comfortable with. But it's like, I don't know, man. I think the sort of whatever its tremendous flaws and limitations, I think now that you're kind of seeing this resurgent ethno-nationalist right really challenging that foundation, I mean, it's sort of should become clearer why it's something that's worth defending for those of us who would like to turn it into something better, not something worse. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.